All right, well, welcome everybody to today's webinar. This is a Forest Her North Carolina event, and we are very, very grateful and honored to have Nancy Strickland Chavis here from the Lumbee Tribe to present on longleaf pine, but I will let her introduce herself.
Thank you, and I'm excited to be with you all on this beautiful Wednesday, on this beautiful fall day. Since we all are love and appreciate and honestly geek out and nerd out over all the beautiful things in nature, I just want to say the color right now is just spectacular. It is just fantastic. I rode by Callaway Forest near Rayford yesterday, and Mother Nature is on full display. So it's such a beautiful time right now. I am the director of the Museum of the Southeast American Indian in Pembroke, North Carolina. We are on the campus of the University of North Carolina at Pembroke. So we're kind of in the southeastern part of the state. Today I'm going to be sharing with you about longleaf pine. And as with many different sort of, I don't want to couch them as necessarily traditional in a way that's sort of not in practice, but tradition as in practice with Native peoples today. And so the title of the presentation is The Longleaf Pine as a Source of Food, Medicine, and Craft for Tribal Nations of the Southeast. I also wanted to mention that I am a very proud member of the Lumbee Tribe, which is also located here in Pembroke, North Carolina. I don't have this in my PowerPoint, but I do want to share that there are 8 tribes in North Carolina and 4 urban Indian centers that facilitate and work with Native communities in places like Raleigh and Charlotte and Fayetteville. So there really is a very vibrant and robust Native community here in North Carolina, and certainly all of us, all 8 tribes, and I would even argue 9 to include the Catawba, that we're very fortunate to still live on our ancestral lands and maintain a very strong and meaningful connection with where we're from. And that actually is a great kickoff to my my first slide. And as a museum director and a historian and a public historian, I'm very interested in these ideas of what defines culture, tradition, heritage, and especially as we try to interpret that for the public. One of the best philosophies that I've engaged with is from an Apache philosopher named Viola Cordova, who has now passed on, but she was absolutely brilliant. And she really coined a term called bounded space. And bounded space speaks to the natural environment that a people exist in, or where people come from, and the intimate relationship that people have with this environment. And Cordova believed, and this is furthered by a contemporary scholar, Miranda Velarde Lewis, who recently curated an exhibition with Preston Singletary from the Northwest Coast. And he's a glass artist, so understanding how his work related to this concept of bounded space, but that everything that we engage with in our environment informs who we are as a people, from language to material culture. And as that material culture is a part of sacred objects, our spirituality, our worldview, our aesthetics are all informed by who and where we come from. And as Native peoples, especially from the Southeast region or the eastern part of North Carolina, most of our homelands are covered by longleaf pine. And certainly not as prolific as it once was, but not completely absent. And so longleaf pine has a very special meaning to us as Native peoples. It is the material that we used for our canoes. We use pine needles for our baskets. We use pine needles to make teas. We ate pine nuts. We used longleaf pine for our housing. And so there was a very important relationship that we had and still have with longleaf pine today. So I wanted to share that concept of bounded space and the role that environment plays in defining cultural identity. So I want to jump into some of the kind of the understandings and uses of longleaf pine. And for us as Native peoples, longleaf pine was very important to create our housing structures. And I think it was Thomas Hilton, when he came through in the late 1600s along the Cape Fear, noted really tall and vast structures that were built out of longleaf pine, where Native peoples had staked in the ground actual trees and that had been cut, staked them in the ground, and then bent the tops over to create the roofs. And that they were very handsomely built, very uniform, very clean structures. And some of these were large enough to hold up to 500 people. So these would be meeting houses or council houses. And then other structures would have been somewhat smaller to accommodate families or kind of multi-unit families, if you will. And so looking at the benefit of longleaf pine, that the needles themselves would have created the sort of thatching effect at the tops. And I will say this, utilizing the benefit of the way that longleaf pine grows itself. So longleaf pine, as it grows naturally in a forest, will drop its lower branches so that the branches don't reach out and obstruct one another from growing up. So normally, if you see a longleaf pine, a lot of those sort of middle, it doesn't have any middle or lower branches. Most of the branches are kind of towards the top of the skyline. And so using that kind of clean tree trunk, if you will, as sort of the housing walls, and then using the natural pine leaves at the top, or pine needles rather, afforded just a great kind of almost like a prefab material, if you will, to build housing structures. And this was noted throughout the southeast region of the United States. The other important part are the palisades, and palisades were very important. And you can see in this sketch, they usually encircled a village, and palisades afforded a couple of important aspects. One is that you can see these sort of round structures that are near the entrance at the front of the image. And there's one on the outside and one just on the inside. And these served as sentinels as people were coming in and out, just for safety and security, to guard who's coming in and out of your village. And certainly you didn't want any invaders coming in or anyone that had any malice towards the community. The other thing is it also maintained keeping certain animals and any sort of like unwanted visitors in your village, whether human or animals, in that sort of way as well. And so creating this kind of palisade or this tall fence structure around villages was very, very important. And it also offered a little bit of, certainly villages would have been in cleared off or savannas landscapes, but it also helped for the village itself sometimes to sort of blend in with the landscape and not be so visible from great distances, which was a wonderful advantage. And I did want to, actually, I probably should have reversed my slides here, but I wanted to talk a little bit about controlled burns and ecosystems. Native peoples have engaged in controlled burns for time immemorial. And longleaf pine is dependent on fire to survive. It needs to be burned, if possible, at least once a year. And a lot of times in nature, weather will, through lightning strikes, will create fires that will burn longleaf pine. or native peoples, we would create controlled burns also. And what that does is it takes out the underbrush so that the trees themselves don't have to compete for real estate, for land that they're actually growing on, or for water or other foods. And the other thing that we would use controlled burns for, not only to ensure the health of longleaf pine, but it also controlled any sorts of pests that would be endemic to the trees themselves. But it would also drastically reduce fleas and ticks and red bugs and all of the little critters that you don't want to have to engage with when you are out in the woods or kind of on savannas or anywhere outdoors. Control burn supported the plant life, especially closer to the coastal plain. So this includes some of our carnivorous plants, such as the Venus flytrap and a few carnivorous flowers that live on the coastal plain that benefit from clearing off that underbrush and that duft that collects, especially from fallen pine needles or other sorts of fallen leaves or branches, things like that. And these plants live very low to the ground and oftentimes are dependent on sort of kind of swampy areas or areas that are holding water. So where any of that duft or material that's on that forest floor or near the swamp floor would absorb all of that, those plants are dependent on that water, so that helps them as well. Maintaining clear savannas for grazing lands for animals, which was important because that was a major part of the food source. An interesting thing that we would do traditionally and probably would continue today, but is illegal by most governments, I'll put it that way, is doing a circle of fire or a ring of fire around certain habitats. Usually this is for deer or bear. It could also be used for smaller game, but a ring of fire was created around a habitat with sort of an open area where once the fire gets going, the animals would then push through that area. Excuse me, 1 second, I'm sorry. The animals would push through that area and hunters could harvest whatever they needed. And then also once they had harvested enough, then they would extinguish that fire and be able to maintain those habitats, because certainly they didn't want to overhunt or kind of remove all of the game from certain areas. I pause there a little bit. I know that sounds very Disney and kind of, idyllic way of hunting, but it was a very efficient way of hunting. It wasn't always perfect. And I don't want people to think that, Native people, this sort of idea about being one with nature and everything was perfect. Not at all. There was sometimes overhunting, overburning, overuse of land, population issues, all the things of societies dealt with. And certainly we did as well. But these were very effective methods of providing food and maintaining grazing lands and habitats for animals. The other thing is that controlled burns, and this is actually something that continues today with a lot of rural Native communities, or I would argue rural communities in general, is that controlled burns are a great way to clear off the land. It's a very quick and efficient way to clear off land. And for a lot of our farmers, when I was a little girl, I could actually remember controlled burns being used to, one, take care of longleaf pine, but two, was to burn off crops from one season to the next. And then the benefits of the nitrogen that would go back into the soil for the next crop. They don't do that as much anymore, but certainly people are burning off land for, if they're kind of off the beaten path and they don't want to spend a lot of time or can be afforded not to have to cut grass. The other thing that controlled burns are really beneficial for in terms of kind of a contemporary use of land are, we're seeing a huge comeback, especially in our area of Robeson County, of, we call them goat heads, or the little sticker briars on the ground. Control burns are great for getting rid of those. But traditionally, we would have used these for clearing off land for villages, for stickball fields, which were very important, not just for recreation, but in a diplomatic sense. Open spaces for stargazing, which was very important to worldview, spirituality, and religion. And these savannas were important open spaces just as much as being out on rivers and lakes and water where we get a clear view of the night sky. I think folks that are doing great work, who are sharing the importance of controlled burns, especially for the health and benefit of Longleaf, is, of course, the Nature Conservancy and their prescribed burns. And so I wanted to make sure that I put that in there because over the past, I think, 6 years, our museum has worked closely with the Nature Conservancy, with community and youth, to talk more about controlled burns and land conservation and preservation. So there are folks that are out doing this every day on a lot of the Nature Conservancy properties. The other use that we have of longleaf pine, which is selfishly my favorite, full disclaimer, this is a picture of my husband in the right, the center photo and the photo to the right. He is an artist. His name's Strickland Chavis, and he is a longleaf pine basket weaver. It's pretty funny that most of the time when I have my daughter and granddaughter live in Oklahoma, and we do these long road trips in the spring and the winter for holidays and visits, is when he'll start weaving a basket. And so this was, I think, year before last, when we were driving to Oklahoma, and he was finishing up a basket. And it's too funny because we'll get into kind of the status of longleaf today, but it can be hard to find. And we pulled over in Alabama at a gas station, and he had just ran out of pine needles, and there was some longleaf next to the parking lot of the gas station, so he was able to source some more pine needles. But on the way back, the middle photo was taken in Nashville, and he, by accident, had the light on his phone on, and he set the basket on top of it just as he was shuffling around for something in the glove compartment. And it was really spectacular to see the light shine through that basket. It kind of cast almost, it looked like stars on the ceiling of the car, and it was just really beautiful. So these pine needle baskets have been made for, it's hard to quantify or how long they've been in existence. The coil method of kind of stacking and coiling the pine needles and sewing them down is a traditional method that's been around for thousands of years, and we see it among many different cultures, but certainly continued among Native people. For our community, it slowed down probably in the late 1800s. And this lovely woman that's pictured in the photograph to the left is Loretta Oxendine. And she revived longleaf pine needle basket weaving among our community in the 1990s. And her husband, who picked up weaving as well, or sewing as it's sometimes called, with her, they together started collaborating on baskets, and they are just absolutely exquisite. So pictured in front of her are some of her larger baskets that she created. She also did really interesting things like hats, and she made some medallions for people's regalia. She did jewelry, and really kind of pushed the envelope and advanced the tradition of longleaf pine needle weaving baskets, and inspired many future generations. Sadly, we lost Miss Loretta last year. But this year, she and her husband, Herman, were recognized as North Carolina state treasures by the Department of Cultural and Natural Resources. which was just a beautiful recognition. We work with, which hopefully this will be my next slide. Yay. We work with young girls. This is just one group that I wanted to highlight, but they're 8th grade girls, and they're with Community in Schools, which is a charter school here in Pembroke, and they are in the building right next door to us. They come over every Wednesday for about an hour and a half, and they learn different cultural teachings, empowerment. And one of the things that we're very fortunate to do in partnership with the Nature Conservancy is that we take them to Callaway Forest, where they learn about longleaf pine. They get introduced to what controlled burns are, kind of the flora and fauna there, efforts of preservation and conservation with the Nature Conservancy. And then they learn how to harvest pine needles to weave their own baskets. So when I go back into kind of thinking about the initial slide where we talked about bounded space, this is really important to be able to have space that people can go and engage with longleaf pine and other habitats, but certainly for Native people in meaningful ways that it provides accessibility and kind of keeps our traditions alive. So they learn how to weave. They learn the basics of how to create the bottom and then how to build up the walls. But their final project is they make a medallion necklace. And we felt like that creating a piece of jewelry kind of inspired by Miss Loretta was important because they could wear that and show it off to their peers, to other kids, and hopefully inspire a younger generation to continue weaving. And now these girls, the knowledge is in their hands, and then they can take their families to places or hopefully within their own communities and gather longleaf pine and continue this tradition of weaving. We have not had one girl in the past 5 years, we get 2 cohorts a year that have done this, that have not fallen in love with it. And it's almost like blood memory, like it is just coursing through their veins to be able to do this. They take off really quickly and learn it really fast and really embrace it. I would say out of this younger group, we've gotten probably about 5 or 6 pretty serious weavers. And these girls aren't even out of high school yet. So this is really, really encouraging and a very powerful experience for them to be able to learn this and embrace their own heritage and identity. I did want to point out the photograph to the left are some Waccamaw Siouan women who were also visiting Callaway Forest, and they also weave baskets. And so they were collecting green longleaf pine. It's interesting that that you could use both. Some people prefer to use the dried longleaf pine needles and then soak them and wash them to clean any pests that might be on them. And they're very pliable when you do that. Some people prefer the green leaves, and then it's really interesting because the green pine needles over time will eventually turn brown and the baskets get a little bit tighter. But they're really beautiful either way. And so just a really important part of our history and culture. The next thing that I want to talk about is medicine and food. And so 2 things. One, you can make a pine needle tea, which is really good for you. It is rich in vitamin C. It actually has 5 times the concentration of the vitamin C that's found in lemons. It can be used to help things with heart disease, varicose veins, skin issues, or even fatigue. It is an immune system booster and can help fight illness and infections. And so traditionally, pine needle tea was used to kind of supplement other medicines to kind of help people boost their immune system, to start feeling better, and to supplement any other sort of traditional medicines that they were used. You can drink pine needle tea every day. I've had a lot of people ask me about this. There's no, people ask about Yopon holly tea, kind of the same way. There's no sort of buildup over time, or won't have any adverse effects on your health. It's completely fine. And you just sort of break the needles up. You could just fold them over and snap them. They could fit into a strainer and a little tea strainer, and then you can pour boiling water over it, and you let it steep for about 15 minutes. It is very bitter. This is not like a black tea or sort of any of the lighter teas, hot teas that you can drink. It is very bitter. So some people add honey or other types of sweeteners. We had some guys that came down that were Nipmuc from Massachusetts, and they drank pine needle tea, and they added real maple syrup to their tea just to sweeten it a little bit. And it was really delicious, and it was really a very lovely tea. I have never had it that way before. But I have the recipe at the bottom of the slide. The other thing that you can do is you can eat pine seeds. And so this usually happens about this time of year when the pine cones are kind of opening and closing, and they're trying to drop their seeds for the fall to go through their process. And so when the pine cones are open, and you'll see the seed just laying inside of the pine cone, and you can kind of hit a pine cone against a hard surface, and the seeds will fall out. Sometimes they have like a little paper kind of covering over the seed, and you can pull that off or pull the end off. You could roast them, or you can eat them raw, and they're also very healthy and very good for you. They have a little bit of a protein content, which is also important. And so certainly traditionally we would have eaten the pine nuts as well. Nuts in general were very important to our ancestors. They still are today. So hickory nuts, acorns, pecans, black walnut, all of those were very important. And we would do nut migrations. A lot of people think about following animals for food and protein. Well, we would also do nut migrations. If you've found any archaeology, if you live in rural areas, sometimes you will find nutting stones that have like a little indention and a smaller stone, and we would have put the nut there and kind of broken it open. So pine nuts were very important to our diet, as well as the pine needle tea. If you're familiar with Lumbee people, you may have seen the Lumbee dress, and the dress itself was inspired by a quilt that we have here at our museum. And I invite you to come and visit it, because it is absolutely spectacular. And there is an incredible love story that is attached to the quilt that I would love to share with you one day. But the quilt itself was created in the early 1900s by Maggie Lowry Locklear. And she was the daughter of Henry Berry and Rhoda Lowry. If you're familiar with those names, they are infamous among Lumbee culture and tradition. I'm going to say infamous and famous. A lot of people called Henry Berry Lowry an outlaw. I like to call him a revolutionary, because he certainly changed things for us for the better among our community. But his daughter, Maggie, made this quilt for her husband. And it's really beautiful. It's kind of hard to tell in the picture, but the brown fabrics are his work pants and work shirts, and the color fabrics are Maggie's tattered aprons and dresses. They did use this quilt quite often, and the squares in the quilt would have been a very beautiful, really beautiful verdant green, and the panels were this beautiful crimson red, and they did wash it in lye soap, which faded it over time. But just an incredible quilt. The design itself resembles the bottom of a longleaf pine cone. And so again, thinking about bounded space and the inspiration for material culture, that was Maggie's inspiration for creating this quilt. It has over 30,000 folds in each, or the total quilt, there's about 3,000 per patch itself. And she did this all by herself. This was not a quilting bee quilt. I always say that. This was Maggie on her own. And so it's just quite an accomplishment. Um, so in the 90s, there was a gentleman named Hayes Allen Locklear who wanted to create sort of a new, very distinct regalia for Lumbee women. And he was inspired not only by the quilt, but also by Maggie's story, by her tenacity and her zeal, her passion, her drive, her artistry itself. And so he designed the Lumbee dress to put that patchwork, that pinecone patchwork, right in the center of an apron. It was actually modeled after one of Maggie's actual dresses. Has a yoke collar with sort of this ruffle around it, and then kind of the layering of the patchwork along the bottom of the apron and the skirt. This took off like wildfire among our people. It just was almost hard to contain. And there was one dress that was created for Natasha Wagner. And I want to say that was sort of in the spring of 91, I think. And by the next year, pretty much all ladies that were involved in the powwow scene, it seemed like almost everyone, at least 100 or more girls, had a Lumbee dress, which was very, very empowering. Thousands of dresses are out there today and through many generations since then. But the other interesting thing that happened was that, picking up on the legacy of Maggie, thinking about this idea of bounded space, who and where we come from, and what the longleaf pine represents to us, the design itself becomes vectorized, and it becomes our sort of our logo. It becomes a recognizable emblem of Lumbee identity. And so the tribe itself has adopted it as the official design for Lumbee people. It's the town of Pembroke. It's their town seal. And you also see it around the campus of UNCP. So when you see this design and you see this logo, then you know that that represents Lumbee people and our affinity for longleaf pine and who and where we come from. The next thing I want to highlight are our dugout canoes. And it is really an important, when we find these dugout canoes, this is from Lake Waccamaw. This was about 2018, I think. The recovery of a dugout canoe that most all of them, every one that has been found, has been made out of longleaf pine, which is really interesting. And because we have a lot of cypress as well that could also be suitable for canoes, but almost all of them are longleaf pine. And so you can actually look at this canoe and tell that it has suffered a little bit of loss, but it's very narrow. And the thing about our canoes is that we stood in them. We didn't sit in them cross-legged the way that a lot of people think about canoes or Indian canoes. And so we would have navigated the waters in them almost like a paddleboard, or if not standing, then on our knees and paddling. Right now, there are about 40-ish canoes in eastern North Carolina, from the Virginia line down almost to the South Carolina line, that are submerged in water. It's very expensive to preserve longleaf pine canoes, but this one was preserved. It is now on display at the Waccamaw Siouan tribal offices, and it is absolutely spectacular. It is, I think, 24 feet long. It is a very long canoe. And probably would have been able to hold up to 10, 12 warriors who would have been navigating not only Lake Waccamaw, but certainly the Waccamaw River and many other places. So we were using canoes for warfare. We were using canoes for fishing. We were using canoes for traveling, exploration. We were using canoes as displays of military power. And so they were very important. The typical kind of method was to, if you got to your destination and you were going to be away for a while, that you could sink a canoe and then come back for it later. And there's great historical reference to Native people diving for their canoes to retrieve them and get them back up above water and then kind of taking off and navigating in them. We do know as well that when the Spanish were along the coast of Georgetown, South Carolina, there were several recordings of Native peoples jumping on their canoes and being at the ships within a matter of minutes. And so we know that our canoes were both used in freshwater and lakes and rivers, but they were also seafaring. And so they certainly would have been used in like the Pamlico and Albemarle Sounds, as well as the ocean. And so we know that these people were incredible navigators and incredible water people who were traversing incredible distances on water. When DeSoto came through, he marveled at our canoes and our road systems. So everybody thinks, oh, these explorers came through and they had to hack through all of these forests and vegetation. Not at all. They were walking on Indian roads and Indian paths, and they were being transported on canoes and had a very, I wouldn't say too cushy, but it certainly was not as laborious as people sometimes imagine. They're just incredible. The canoe that we have here in our museum is 1,100 years old, and it was found underneath the 5th Street Bridge in Lumberton. And that canoe was also fully intact, but when they were taking it to underwater archaeology, it suffered a lot of loss. They strapped it to the back of a trailer. This was in 1979. And in doing so, it was drying out and pieces fell off. But it's really incredible to see the burnout method. We can still see where they used fire on this canoe and on the other ones. And it's just really fantastic to see how they were made. We, again, partnered with the Nature Conservancy. About 3 years ago, we had an intern, and we're working on a project called Life by the River. And the Nature Conservancy was very generous, and there was a very large longleaf pine that it was showing signs of disease, and they wanted to take it down. And we have been looking for one at some of their other properties. And so our intern and the Nature Conservancy team was able to fall that tree, and we took it to a mill and had it planed in half. The intern every Saturday was out at our cultural center with the Lumbee Tribe's cultural center, and they, with community and the intern, built a dugout canoe in the traditional method. And it was just really remarkable to engage in that process again and just be able to share that with community. We actually have that canoe also here in our museum, and kids are really fortunate because they're able to climb in it and experience it. We wrote a canoe song that accompanies that, and so they really get that kind of feeling of what it was like to be in an ancient dugout canoe made of longleaf pine. Now, I do want to take a moment to talk about the Carolina parakeet. And I know you're thinking, Carolina parakeet, longleaf pine. The Carolina parakeet was a beloved bird of Native peoples, especially in the Carolinas. And we would domesticate the Carolina parakeet and have them as pets. They were, their population was in the thousands, hundreds of thousands. They were everywhere. They were vocal. They spoke many different Native languages. And we also would use their feathers in our traditional feather work. So for these really beautiful collars or capes and mantles, we would use their feathers to adorn ourselves with. And so this just was a very beloved bird to Native peoples in the Carolinas. And early explorers also give these beautiful accounts of them, how they would take off in these flocks, and they would just create this sort of rainbow in the sky, that they were just so beautiful. Their feathers were these really lovely blue and greens and yellows and a little bit of the red. And the feathers themselves were iridescent. So when they would take off and this big flock of this kind of blanket rainbow in the sky, the feathers themselves would reflect light, and it just looked like a beautiful display of color. The Carolina parakeet's primary habitat was longleaf pine. And so they also would roost in cypress trees, but they really preferred longleaf pine. And so over time, the Carolina parakeet kind of being, how do you say, maybe one of the first contact sorts of really intense engagements with explorers. These explorers were unnerved because these birds could speak native language. So you can imagine on a weary day and you are resting or trying to just take a break from trekking for many, many miles, and you hear these birds up in the trees speaking native language and you're not sure if it's a person or not. They started shooting the birds and killing some of them off. As settlers began to clear off longleaf pine and also cypress for farmland that jeopardized their habitat and their food sources. Of course, they were eating longleaf pine nuts and cypress nuts and things like that. And so without a food source and habitat, they started eating some of the crops that were planted, and some of the farmers and others started considering them pests and killing them off also. And over time, this led to the extinction of the Carolina parakeet. And so I always think of the Carolina parakeet as a cautionary tale of basically the threat of what happens to the flora and fauna if we don't make space for what is here traditionally, if you will. And I even argue that the Carolina parakeet parallels Native peoples, unnerving in the way sometimes in at some points in history needed to be moved from traditional lands, and loss of habitat and loss of place certainly has threatened many Native peoples, not only in the Southeast, but across the United States. So with the Carolina parakeet, we'll turn to the threat of longleaf pine. And the first true threat to the longleaf pine is the turpentine industry, which started around the 1750s, a little bit earlier, but formally where it really got some real power and steam was in the 1750s. The turpentine is used to create what are called naval stores. So pitch and tar that were used to build and repair ships. Sometimes turpentine was used as medicine or in other ways for building houses and things like that. And so where you once had 4 to 5 million acres of longleaf pine in North Carolina's coastal plain, it was decimated by the turpentine industry that continued through the 1920s. In fact, it moved out of North Carolina, the Carolinas, and pushed further inland into places like the upper part of Florida, Alabama, and Georgia. Native people were a part of this. This was one of our big diaspora moments. Many people followed the turpentine industry for work. This is one of the few industries that Native people were allowed to work in, along with some African Americans, free people of color were able to work in the turpentine industry. And so we actually played a role in the major loss of longleaf pine. Longleaf pine, of course, exists still, but is not as prevalent as it was. Loblolly was a replacement for longleaf pine because it has a shorter growth span. So still trying to meet the need. Of course, now loblolly pines, because of how straight they grow, are used for telephone poles and utility works and things like that. But the longleaf pine certainly is threatened. And so thankfully, the Nature Conservancy has played a tremendous role in preserving longleaf pine. And like I said earlier, creating accessibility where we might find small patches of longleaf pine clusters of 20 or 30 trees. Certainly being able to go to acreage and acreage of a longleaf pine savanna that is being managed and maintained is almost unheard of today. It is just an absolute treasure for all of the public that can access these spaces. And so it's really important as we look at sort of the settling of the nation and the impact that it had on longleaf pine. And I just kind of spoke a little bit to the loss and restoration efforts. Callaway Forest is just one of many properties that the Nature Conservancy and other parks and organizations, try not to sneeze, y'all, so sorry, the fall allergies, but efforts to preserve and maintain longleaf pine and the broader ecosystems that they also, as being a part of, support. Okay, I finished right on time. I don't know how we want to do this, but I think I can stop sharing my screen. Maybe is that the best next step to answer any questions that you all might have?
Yeah, that sounds like a great time. We can open up the floor. There weren't any questions in the chat, so folks, yes, let's give Nancy a big round of applause. You don't actually have to turn your mic off to clap, but just a nice one. There we go. Love to see those reactions. Thank you so much, Nancy. Yeah, does anyone have any questions? Feel free to unmute, and if you want to turn your video on, be my guest.
Hi, Nancy. This is Andrea. How are you?
Hey, I'm great. How are you?
Great. Thank you for your presentation today. And I was wondering if we would be able to get some of the recipes for using the pine needle.
Yes, absolutely. I can share my slides with Mackenzie, and maybe she could email that out to everyone. The tea recipe is really simple, and I put that at the bottom of the slide. And you can use pine nuts in many different ways. You can bake with them, you can roast them, you can use them in salads. Let's see. I don't know. There might be, I don't know about longleaf, but I want to say there is a longleaf pine nut flour. And that I'll have to double check on that, but certainly I can share that one simple tea recipe with you. Is very easy.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And I really enjoyed today.
Oh, very good. Thank you so much. I do see a question in the chat. Okay. That's a great question, and I should have put that in there. The way you tell the difference between a loblolly and a longleaf is that a longleaf have these great big robust pom-poms on the branches themselves, and so they're kind of almost in a circle, and the needles are very long. Most of them are over 12 inches long. The loblolly, the needles are about 6 inches long. So that's one way of telling, but it looks like a big fanned out pom-pom is a way of being able to identify it. Great question.
Hi, Nancy. This is Erica from Weymouth Woods.
Yes, how are you?
Good.
Good to
So
see
as
you.
an educator and a non-native educator, how do you feel, not that you have all the answers, but people giving programs on native arts and crafts and, making pine needle tea and things like that?
Yes, absolutely. I think that like for baskets, for instance, this was something that was very generously shared, I think, with folks when they were coming in and settling. And you can see everything starting in the 1700s moving forward, especially in the Carolinas, of like sewing baskets and little storage baskets, food collecting baskets. So, there's even some research being looked at, like with Gullah Geechee. And even though that coiled method is a traditional method around the world, we know that Native people through colonial wear with pottery were sharing technologies and sort of like, okay, you're in this new place. Here's the clay. Here's the pine needles, or here's the material to weave. And so there's even been research to say, well, did Native people help inform Gullah Geechee baskets? So absolutely, I think it's perfectly fine to share that and share the history of it, and the coming together of what makes us uniquely Southerners, I think is very important, right? So yeah, the more we share and just kind of speak to the origins of things, I think that's wonderful. Absolutely.
Perfect. Yeah, it's always nice to get people's hands into something when they're something. So I was really thinking that it might be a cool thing to do. So,
and there's lots of Longleaf weaving Facebook groups. Okay. And it's just incredible what people are doing, like incorporating other materials. And I saw this one lady did a whole pine needle presentation for her casserole dish that she was going to have on her table at Thanksgiving. I mean, they're doing flower vases and all different kinds of things. So it's really wonderful. And you can buy longleaf pine needles online. So there are some vendors who actually sell them.
I definitely don't need them.
yeah, that's right. Well, you know what else? When I was in, we were on the Natchez Trace in, where were we? Alabama, Mississippi. Sorry, my allergies are crazy. But they had kits. They had put together these little pre-made kits with instructions of how to weave a basket. They had collected longleaf on their property and just did a couple of bundles. And, they were selling them to help make money to contribute to their visitor center. So I think that's great.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Let's see. Where can you buy longleaf pine needle baskets? That is a great question. So we try to carry them here in our museum store, for instance. And these are ones made by Native peoples. I think there's lots of places throughout the South that you can find, especially in handmade arts and crafts stores. I think about like Asheville or places in Eastern North Carolina. But it's been challenging since the Oxendides have passed away, and they're hard to and take a lot of time to make. But we do get them here sometimes. They're usually the smaller ones.
Is the North Carolina Crafters Guild, like there's a guild that does a lot of folk art, the Folk Arts Guild, are they a good source for maybe looking at for longleaf pine baskets? Because I know that's very close to what y'all.
Yeah, I think so. I just saw the comment about Native people. Certainly, we have some baskets. We're running low, but we do have about 5 or 6 here. We're working on getting more. I think that the North Carolina Museum of Art, their gift shop, the North Carolina, well, they're closed right now. The History Museum did have some by Native artists as well. But yeah, I think just checking in with communities and maybe museums, community museums, or tribal museums rather, and seeing if they have anything. And just kind of, if you can find a weaver, follow them, because they usually have a community and you can buy things online. I have never seen an active pine tar kiln. I cannot imagine. I know, to me, when I think about pine tar or turpentine, it reminds me of like moonshine is the process that I think of, and that's kind of my closest thing that I've seen. But I know it was very difficult work. We have a lot of turpentine tools here that a couple of families donated to us. We don't have like the big, I call it a distillery. But we do have some of the hand tools and things. And we have incredible stories about people that worked in turpentine. In fact, real quick, I talked to you all about the quilt, and I told you about Maggie. Part of the love story is that Maggie was engaged to to Hezekiah, who she made the quilt for, but she was engaged, and then Hezekiah was trying to work and get money together to kind of fix up his farm. And an older gentleman came along, and she ended up marrying him and broke Hezekiah's heart. He dies from natural causes, and then she's single. She and Hezekiah get back together, and then she ends up taking off with another guy, and they go to Georgia for turpentine. And they're married, broke Hezekiah's heart again. They're married for about a year, and he is out in the woods. What do they call it? Tapping trees, I think, and gets bit by a venomous snake, and he dies. And so it is, Maggie's kind of stuck in a turpentine camp for almost a year, and she has to make money as a washerwoman to make her way back home. She said that she never wanted to look at or think about turpentine ever again later in life. So pretty interesting. Oh, okay. I'll have to look online on YouTube to check that out. Yeah. That'd be cool. That would be very cool. Any other questions?
Looks like there's one that says, when fire is not a tool that can be used, what other strategies foresters can use to help longleaf pine forests?
That is a great question. That might be a little bit out of my wheelhouse, but I do know that if longleaf doesn't have fire, at least over the course of a few years, then it stunts the growth of the tree. And so at some point, it really will need fire to, basically be an essential part of the life of the tree. I think that maintaining the underbrush is really important, because that also competes with the viability of longleaf pine. So if you've got like a lot of underbrush that's growing around, a lot of duft on the forest floor, things like that, all of that is going to ultimately jeopardize the health and life and longevity of longleaf pine. So keeping those things kind of low and cleaned out are very important. I think when you think about the labor involved in all of that and how dense and thick things can get, especially in eastern North Carolina, like fire is the easy answer for doing that. See, thank you all. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you so much, Nancy, for today. We really, really appreciate it. Your intelligence and kindness about how you're delivering this is very, very palpable. So thank you so much.
We'll never look at longleaf pine the same again, right?
That's right. That's right. And I wanted to extend a big thank you and shout out to everyone who attended today. We had over 70 people attend this webinar, so that's a huge number, which is fantastic. Really spreading the good word of the cultural significance of longleaf pine across the state. And I did put it up earlier in the chat, a little prematurely, but I put it in there. If you're interested more in learning more about forest here in North Carolina, or joining the Facebook group that we have online, I put those links in the chat. So you might just need to dig up there a little bit to find those. But this event was definitely put on by Forest for North Carolina. And so we wouldn't have been able to do this without Nancy today and without you all attending. So thank you to everybody. And I think that's a wrap. So have a great rest of your day.
Thank you all. Come see me at the Museum of the Southeast American Indian. We'd love to have you.